Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on the Fantasy Football Fix YouTube channel. Now it's going to be something slightly different today, but something that I hope you guys find very interesting. For those of you that don't follow me personally, my YouTube channel, my Twitter account, and you don't know who I am, I'm a PhD student in sports psychology and I also lecture in sports psychology as well. And I have quite a long background, academic background in psychology. And I'm very interested in trying to use psychology to improve the way we make decisions in FPL. So much so that I've indeed written a book on the psychological aspects of Fantasy Premier League. So today, what I'm going to be doing is talking about some of the aspects from that book, trying to show you how psychology applies really well to FPL, and in particular, how we can use psychology to improve the way we interpret statistics. Yes, statistics in and of themselves are objective, but the way we interpret those puts a subjective spin on them. And whilst the data itself is objective, therefore, we can then be very biased in our decision making despite using objective data. So we're going to have a bit of a chat about that today. Something a bit different. I hope you enjoy it. So, without further ado, let's get into today's video. So in today's video, I'm going to be going through 5 tips to try and improve our decision making in FPL, and all of them are in relation to the way we interpret statistics. So again, I think because obviously this is the Fantasy Football Fix YouTube channel and I'm interested in psychology as well. Obviously Fantasy Football Fix are very heavily interested in stats, and so I thought if you're interested in Fantasy Football Fix, then you'll probably like your stats yourself. And I think it is very interesting because everyone thinks, well, stats are objective, which they are. Like, you can't fudge the stats. Stats are stats. However, because we have to interpret the stats and decide what we pay attention to, as soon as we start interpreting them, we bring our subjective interpretation in, and that's when biases can come into play. So it's very important to be aware of those. So tip number 1 is to try and avoid confirmation bias and avoid adjusting sample sizes. Now, if you're new to psychology and you don't know what confirmation bias is, that's fine. Confirmation bias is essentially our natural tendency to try and actively seek information which confirms our prior belief. So say in 1 week, I really want to captain Mo Salah. And as a result, I scroll through Twitter or whatever social media platform you're on. I keep scrolling until I see an article or a post that says Salah is the best captaincy. And I go, right, that's the one I want. And I start reading that post. And then the reason I do that is because I want someone to confirm what my prior belief is. I want to captain Salah, and therefore I want someone to tell me it's the best choice. And often, basically, any time that we are posting our team, if you post in the comments, what do you think of my team? You're probably looking for confirmation. You're probably falling victim to confirmation bias. You want someone to tell you, yes, that's the correct decision. And it's a natural tendency we all have. Everyone does it. I do it myself. Of course I do. So it also applies, as well as when you're posting your team and asking questions about your team and looking on social media. It does apply when you're looking at statistics as well. And the main way it applies is if you're searching for statistics to suit your prior belief. So say last season when Kelechi Iheanacho went on that fantastic run of form. Say last season you wanted to bring in Kelechi Iheanacho and you wasn't sure what sample size to look at, etc. So this is just to show you the influence of adjusting a sample size or a game week range in statistics by 1 game week. So if you're just listening, I can read it out for you guys. So the first screenshot is Kelechi Iheanacho statistics from game week 33 to game week 38. 3.38 total shots, 1.69 on target, 1.88 in the box, 3.38 open play, 0.56 big chances, and 0.32 XG. Now, those statistics are good. They're very good. That would put him in sort of the top 5, top 10 players in the league at that point for that period of time. So the statistics there are very good. However, if you extend that sample size by 1 game from game week 33 to game week 32, so now we're looking at game week 32 to game week 38, his total shots go from 3.38 to 4.11. Shots in the box go from 1.88 to 2.21. Open play shots go from 3.38 to 3.95. Big chances 0.56 to 0.79. And XG 0.32 to 0.53. Now, I'd like to say at this point, these are per 90 statistics. So they've not just increased because we've added an extra game. These are per 90 statistics, and yet they've gone up dramatically when you include game week 32 as well. And that's because in game week 32, I think he scored a brace or a hat-trick. So this shows that 1 extra sample point or 1 extra data point can completely skew the data in one direction or another. And basically, I've seen a lot of people in the past say, listen, in the last 4 games, this person is top for XG, or in the last 11 games, this person is top for expected assist. That tells me that they're data mining or they're searching for sample sizes that support their prior belief. Now, what I would suggest about this is a number of things. Analytically, you want the biggest sample size possible. The more data you have, the easier it is to draw on trends and interpret the data. So the first thing is use the biggest sample size you can. But psychologically, what I would suggest is, number one, try and keep the sample sizes you look at fairly consistent. If throughout the season you're going to look at 8 to 10 game weeks, try and keep it like that. Don't start making it 3 or 4 because you want to look at a player that's suddenly in form and you want to bring him in and you're looking for that confirmation. So, yeah, so try and keep the sample size consistent. And the other thing is try and look at, if you do change the sample size, how does that affect it? Because it would be crazy to look at 8 games and go, yeah, that's the best player. But then if you change it to 6 games, and then they're just not on the statistics at all, because basically the 2 games before the 6-game run was what skewed the data because they scored back-to-back hat-tricks. But in the last 6 games, they've barely had a shot. So yes, try and keep the data, the sample sizes consistent, but also try and realize how, if you do change it, how does that affect the data, and how does that affect the decision that you would end up making? Essentially, just be aware that as human beings, we have this tendency to try and actively search for information which suits what we want to do. If we want to captain a player, we'll look for information. And so the other thing you can do is try and actively search for information that disconfirms your prior belief. If you want to captain Salah, search for data which suggests, wait, is Bruno the best idea? Is Ronaldo, Lukaku? Try and search for data which disconfirms your beliefs, because it might be that when you do that, you seek logical alternatives and you realize that the decision you planned on making was not the best decision after all. Either way, I think confirmation bias is a really interesting one because we all fall victim to it, and you should definitely keep it in mind when you're, number one, searching for statistics and also asking people about your team, because it's likely that all you want people to do is tell you, yeah, your team looks great, and you're probably experiencing confirmation bias. So this one will be a slightly shorter tip. Don't worry, they won't all be as long as that first one. But I find it a really interesting one, and I think it nicely ties into what we're doing over at Fantasy Football Fix on the website. This bias is known as the law of instrument bias, and it's something we should do our best to avoid in all aspects of life, but specifically in FPL when we're doing our research. If you're interested in psychology or you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you may have heard of Maslow. Maslow made this beautiful quote in 1966, and it perfectly encompasses the law of instrument bias. And he says, I suppose it's tempting, if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as if it were a nail. The point he's making is that if you only use one tool throughout your life to interpret things and to make your decisions, you'll treat every situation as the same situation, and you won't consider all of the different elements of that situation. And it applies to FPL. If you only ever use underlying statistics, you'll always treat the situation fairly similarly. If you only ever decide which striker to bring in based on expected goals, you're not going to consider all the other things. Do they have creative abilities? Are they passing the eye test? There are multiple things that you can do to decide what to do in FPL. And I've just put a few of them on screen from the Fantasy Football Fix website, just to show you that our website has lots of different things that you can do on the site, and it would be silly to only use one thing over and over again, because in that way your decision making is going to be very one-dimensional. So you can look at touch maps, heat maps, pass maps, attempted assist maps. There's about 8 or 9 different maps we've got. Different attacking radar sort of diagrams comparing different players, fixture analyzer, who has the best fixtures coming up. You can do statistical comparisons between 4 different players. And on top of all of this, which isn't on the Fantasy Football Fix website, is the eye test as well. Watch the games, see which players look in form. Statistics don't always pick up things. So an example of this is if De Bruyne sprays a 50-yard pass to Raheem Sterling and it puts it on a plate and Sterling's 1 yard out with an open goal, but he misses the football. In that case, the underlying statistics wouldn't pick that up as a key pass. It wouldn't pick it up on the expected assists because Sterling hasn't touched the ball. So there are certain things that, while statistics are brilliant at, they don't pick up on everything. So the point I want to make here is that whilst things like expected goals are probably one of the best tools you can use to make your decisions, I would advise that you still use as many different sources of data as possible. Try and always search for things, again, which disconfirm your belief, support your belief. Search for as many things as possible. The more tools you have in your arsenal, the better when it comes to making decisions in FPL. So beware of the law of instrument bias and do your best to try and avoid it wherever possible. Right, I'm trying something here that I think should be really fun and exciting. It might not be, but stick with it and let me know in the comments if you like it. I've never done anything like this. So I am from a psychology background. I did a bachelor's in psychology, master's, PhD. I've done lots of experiments in the past. And I think part of the excitement towards psychology is experiments, but they're very difficult to do virtually and online. Either way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and do an experiment with you guys over YouTube. Obviously, you can skip forward to the next tip if this isn't for you, but I want to try and demonstrate it firsthand because I can say these things and you can think, no. So I'm going to try and prove it if possible. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video and grab a pen and paper or open up a Word document, because at the end of the experiment, you're going to need to type out a few things or write out a few things. So if you can pause the video now, grab something to write, and then come back to the video in 2 minutes, that'd be perfect. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a cross appear on the screen. It will be a black screen with a white cross. And once that cross appears, what I'd like you to do is look at the screen and words are going to flash up on the screen. Okay, so there's going to be a word flash up for around 2 or 3 seconds. And after all the words have flashed up, we're going to wait 30 seconds and then you're going to try and recall as many as possible. Okay, so as the words coming up on the screen, try your best to remember them. You don't have to do it really seriously. Obviously, you don't write them down before the experiment's over. Only use your mind, only use your memory. But just think, as the words are popping up, try and remember them. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you to recall as many words as possible. Okay, so that's the experiment. If you've done it before, then cool. This might not work for everyone. So you're about to see a video now. As the cross appears, you know you have a few seconds and then the word's going to flash up on the screen. And I'll catch you after that, guys. Right, guys, those are the words. Pause the video for 30 seconds. Once you've paused the video for 30 seconds, you can then return to your Word document or the paper you've got on the table and write out as many words as you can remember. So wait 30 seconds, then write out the words. So that is the experiment over. I'm now going to quickly explain what the experiment's about, how it applies to FPL, and then we can see how many you got out of the possible list of 13 words. So this is to do with considering the order in which you digest information. As FPL managers, we often consider what we're digesting, what statistics are we looking at, when are we looking at them. We don't often consider the order throughout the week in which we digest information. Now, obviously, this experiment was very time pressured. So this is to do with the order in which you receive information over like the space of like 20, 30 seconds. And obviously in FPL, it's across a week, so it is slightly different. But generally speaking, there's been a lot of research over different lengths of time, which suggests that we remember things that are at the beginning of a set period of time, and we remember things that are at the end very well, but we often forget things in the middle. Now, the original experiments were like you've just done on a list, and the words at the beginning were always remembered really well, which they called primacy effect. And the words at the end were always remembered really well, which we call recency effect. And the words in the middle are often forgotten. Now, this total sort of process is called the serial position effect, and it essentially says the position in which information is perceived and processed affects the way it's retained, remembered, and then utilized as well. So in FPL, if you look at data on a Monday morning, so on a Monday you do loads of research and that suggests you should captain Fernandes, there's a high chance that by the time the end of the week comes around, you'll still want to captain Fernandes because that's the first bit of information you processed. And as well as primacy effect, there are 2 other biases which support this. There's one called anchoring bias, which says that we tie our metaphorical anchor to an idea, and as such, we find it very difficult to jump off that idea. And the other one is plan continuation bias, which is where we decide on a plan of action at the start, and after we've decided on that plan, we're very stubborn and we want to stick to that. So there's lots of data, lots of evidence, lots of psychological biases which suggest that we stick to things we process at the start of a period of time, in this case at the start of the week, and then not so much in the middle. And then obviously the end, recency effect. So perhaps all week we've had an idea, but on Friday, we see a piece of evidence which suggests that no, Bruno Fernandes is the best captaincy option. And as a result, we completely change because that's the most recent thing. It's the most available in our brain. And as such, we suddenly change to that last minute decision. So Some people are more prone to experiencing primacy effect. Some people are more prone to experiencing recency effect. It really does depend on the person. It depends on the situation as well. And it does depend on what the pieces of information are. So what I'm going to now try to do is hopefully in this experiment, as many of you as possible remembered a lot of words at the beginning of the list and a lot of words at the end and not so many of the middle words. Now, again, this is virtual. Some of you might not have been paying attention. Some of the words in the middle might be more meaningful to you guys, whereas some of the words at the end aren't. So there are a lot of reasons why this might work or might not work, but it was just a bit of fun. So you're now going to see the words on the screen, and these are basically, I've split them into the words at the beginning, the words in the middle, of the words at the end. So the 5 words at the beginning, again, the cutoff is very sort of arbitrary. I could have cut off at friendship and day. But anyway, the 5 words at the beginning were strong, intelligent, map, table, and friendship. So those were sort of like the beginning section. The middle section were wide, pencil, and great. And then the last 5 were day, sofa, chocolate, matte, and orange. So this study would suggest that strong, intelligent, map, and then chocolate, matte, and orange should be the sort of ones that you remember the most, and less people should remember wide, pencil, and great. But as I said before, obviously, if you've got like a pencil in your hand and you're twirling it around and pencil popped up on the screen, it might be that pencil was really easy for you to remember. Equally, if you were eating chocolate, it might. So it does very much depend on the situation you're in, the person that you are, whether you're going to experience primacy, recency, or the ones in the middle. But there is a lot of evidence to support this across numerous studies. But anyway, I thought it would be quite interesting to do this study. All I would say is just be aware of the order in which you receive information, especially if you listen to podcasts. That's why a lot of podcasters and YouTube content creators and people that write articles try to get them out earlier in the week, because people are more likely to remember their articles if they're processed like right at the start of the week. Also, a really good tip for other aspects of life, because that's what I like to do as well. If you're ever offered the opportunity to interview and you get to choose the time of day at which you interview, I would also always suggest interviewing first thing in the morning, being one of the first people to interview at like 9 a.m, or pick like 3 or 4 p.m. at the end of the day. If you interview during the middle of the day, you're not making the most of primacy effect, you're not making the most of recency effect, and there's a chance that you'll be forgotten by the people interviewing you. If you go hard at the start, then it might be that they remember you and they tie their metaphorical anchor to you as a candidate. Or if you go last, it might be availability. They've had loads of people throughout the day, but they remember you because you were the last person they interviewed. So there are lots of ways you can apply this. I find it very interesting. Let's move on to tip 4. Now, I like tip 4 because it uses some pretty cool words that, yeah, they always sound cool when you say them. But anyway, the general area of research that we're looking at now, the general tendency is known as apophenia. Apophenia is the tendency to perceive connections between 2 unrelated things. So to see 2 things that don't have any actual connection or relation and say, they're clearly related, one thing's causing the other, or one thing is happening in relation to the other. And in statistics, a form of apophenia is the clustering illusion. And this is the tendency to see things in data and identify them as trends or meaningful data despite them just being random pieces of variance. Now, a really good example of this in last season, you might remember this yourself if you played last year, is Jack Grealish and the fact that he seemed to haul every 3 games. So this is taken directly from the website, and I've just put little red circles around them. But you can see game week 2 and 3, no double-digit haul. Game week 4, 24 points. Game week 5 and 6, blanks. Game week 7, 15. Game week 8 and 9, 6 and 1. Game week 10, 10 points again. So this went on 4 times in a row where he hauled every 3rd game. And people started to say that, you can't. I think in game week 15 and 16 he then blanked. And people were telling me you can't sell him in game week 17 because he's going to haul in game week 17. And it did become a bit of a joke. But some people genuinely see this information and we think, it must mean that he hauls every 3rd game. And this is clearly just variance. There is no way that Jack Grealish can haul every 3rd game and it be meaningful. Every 3rd game is against a different opposition. Perhaps he plays a more easy opposition in the 2nd game or the 1st game. And it's impossible to try and predict future performances based on this. This is just variance. This is just random pieces of clustering of information. And you shouldn't try and draw meaningful patterns from this. And the idea is that this causes phantom patterns, and the phantom patterns is they're not real. Okay, they are patterns, but they don't really exist. So what I would say is be very careful when you're looking at data. If there appears to be random spikes in data, try and think, are they actually random? Are they meaningful? Is there a way in which I can say with certainty that this is a meaningful change in the data or a meaningful spike? And again, the longer you have to look at it, if the same thing's happening over like 50 or 60 games, then you might say, do you know what, there is something meaningful here. But if it happens over like 2 or 3 games and you see that, oh, maybe they play 2 home games and 2 away games and they score double-digit haul in 2 home games and they blank in both away games, in 4 games of data, that's not really enough to say for certain that there is a meaningful relationship there. So I would just be careful, specifically looking at small sample sizes, but looking at any data in general. Try not to experience the clustering illusion. Try and think, is this meaningful or is it just a random spike or random piece of variance in the data? If you're still with me, thank you for watching this far. I hope you are finding it interesting. The final one is the framing effect, which is probably one of the most applicable to FPL, and it does also relate to confirmation bias in tip 1. And framing effect is what it says on the tin. It's the way that we frame data. So the same piece of data can be framed positively and it can be framed negatively. So I'm going to read out a scenario now and show you how the same scenario, the same piece of data can be completely switched whether you frame it positively or negatively. So the scenario is Jamie Vardy has scored 14 goals from 50 shots with 5 of the 14 goals from penalties. So I'm not going to say whether I think that's good or bad. That is the data. If you frame this positively because you want to bring in Jamie Vardy or you own him and you want to captain him, if you frame this positively, you could say, Jamie Vardy scored 28% of shots he has taken in this season in the Premier League. That means he is scoring almost 1 in 3 of his attempts on goal. He is also on penalties, which makes him even more of a goal threat. Right, so that's a positive frame. That means we want to bring in Jamie Vardy or we own him, we want to captain him. A negative frame, we don't want to bring him in. We want to say that he's not a good option. Jamie Vardy is failing to score 72% of his attempts on goal this season in the Premier League. That means he's failing to score approximately 3 out of every 4 shots. Also, 5 of his goals were scored with penalties, which means that his conversion rate is probably even worse if you take away the penalties. Right? To be fair, that scenario, probably Jamie Vardy scoring 14 goals from 50 shots, is probably quite good. But you can see that you can frame it positively or negatively. If you read the negative frame on social media or YouTube and framed it in that way, you'd say, hang on a second, I don't think Vardy's a great option. However, if they frame it positively, score 28% of his shots, especially if someone's verbalizing it, because you can put emphasis on it, 28%. And unfortunately, this is where data that is objective, 14 goals from 50 shots is objective, that's when it can turn from being objective into subjectiveness, and you can see how biases can influence the way we interpret the data. So if you're a content creator, try and be careful the way you're framing data. Try and think, are you framing it positively or negatively? Is there a way you can frame it neutrally? And if you're interpreting data, think, are you interpreting it in a positive or negative way because you're trying to confirm the decision you already had, which again is linked to confirmation bias. So that's the 5th and final tip. Just beware of the way that other people and yourself are framing the data. So guys, there you have it. That is the end of today's video on FPL and psychology and statistics. I really hope you did enjoy it. If you did enjoy it, let me know below and I can do more of these in the future on the Fantasy Football Fix YouTube channel. Of course, I also do psychology videos and other FPL videos on my own YouTube channel, FPL Raptor. So if you want to see more of that, head over to my channel after watching this and please do subscribe and join me on that journey as well. We will be coming to you with more videos during the international break, and then obviously towards the end of the international break, we'll be back again with the daily price prediction videos, price change prediction videos. So please do join us on that. Please subscribe to the channel, enable notifications so that you know when all of our cool content's coming out, and we'll catch you in the next video, guys. Thank you very, very much.